次のところで11世紀に契丹が攻めてきた時にも中国が朝鮮を守ったが、その背景にはこうした儒学でのつながりがあった、ジョルチンの時もそうだった。ジュルチェン、17世紀に日本が攻めてきた時にも中国が助けた。フィーライハン The Legend of フビライハンが朝鮮人の教養を高く評価し、高麗って書いてあるゴリオコークリーかな。これ高麗に人材を置くとした。これ高麗とコークリーと両方時代によって名前違うのかな。コークリーでしょ。
高麗
ゴコークリー。
あ、その後高麗は10世紀。
あ、これはね、10世紀だ。朝鮮って歴史があるんだよね。彼らは仏教を勉強していた。道教も勉強して、これね、仏教徒の僧侶も論語を教えていた。だから儒教、仏教、道教は混在して教えられていた。朝鮮の時代になってそれが変わっていった。これ朝鮮で変わっていったというのは、李氏朝鮮になったらば仏教禁止したんだよね。
あ、そうなんです
か。でこの豪領って高麗の頃まで儒教、仏教、道教を教えていた。混在してね。
Civil service examination began as early as the 4th century, continued on all the way down to the 20th century. What the civil service examination is that members of a certain class, usually an elite landowning class, would either through private schooling or publicly sponsored schooling learn classical texts, learn classical history, learn to write poetry, learn to write prose. So this would qualify them to take an exam to get into a national academy. Then, depending upon which period, they would either spend 5 or they could spend up to 9 years in this nationally sponsored academy.
5年から9年勉強してから科挙を受験できる。すごいよね。
Going through every classical text that is associated with Confucius, at the end of which they took an exam. And the exam was just basically a set of questions that the examiner would ask, what does, King Chang of the later Han Dynasty's action at a certain battle mean or govern? So they had to know all these things. And then they would write essays. Not only did they have to write essays, but they had to write essays in what are called rhyme couplets.
Rhyme couplets って二行韻だから、ここで韻を踏んで次のまででここで韻を踏んで同じ韻が踏む。
It's called parallel prose. So they had to analyze the question in ways that every 5 characters rhymed with the next 5 characters. A very elaborate form of civil service. If they passed that exam, then they would go on to other studies and then pass more exams. Eventually, they would take what's called the tekko, or the highest exam, upon which if they successfully passed it, then they could be appointed to office. Okay? It's very much. Any of you taken the civil service exam here in the United States?
これね、彼っていうのはアメリカのことを言ってるんだけど、アメリカにも科挙制度みたいなことあるんだよね。
そうなんですか。
Yeah. Take a civil service exam, you get a ranking within the U.S. government. GS12, GS9, 8, blah blah blah. And so.
だから日本のなんだっけもうわかんないけど、日本の場合には例えば外務省に入って合格したらまたその中でもランキング試験があるのかな。あんまり聞いたことないんだけど。
帰るときに国家公務試験の
その後さ入った後
みたいな
ランキング上げるための試験ってあるのかな。あるんだろうな。アメリカ今言ったようなことある。
So forth, and you become a bureaucrat. And the civil service exam, they're primarily, at least from the beginning until about the 10th century, examined people's writing skills and their knowledge skills. After the 11th century, the civil service exam tested their philosophical skills. So what does Jushi mean when he says this about the classics? Okay, and in Korea and Japan, Jushi Neo-Confucianism became the orthodox curriculum. So you had to know everything that the Song Dynasty Neo-Confucian philosopher said about anything.
これ日本は科挙制度を入れなかったんで、何入れなかったのこれよくわかんないけど。
Now, and then emphasis was on content rather than writing. In the early years, the emphasis was on how well you could compose a document. Good story. And when the Mongols took over China, Mongols didn't like the Chinese. Chinese didn't like the Mongols. But the Mongols actually wanted to put down the Chinese. So one day, actually an early Neo-Confucian, late Koryo, early Chosun dynasty, a man by the name of Isek was living in China.
イセクって誰だかわかんない。
And Kublai Khan, emperor of China, called Isek to his palace and so on and so forth, and decided to, in fact, he asked Isek, what was the meaning of pleasant such?
わかったかな、イセクって、わかったね、どっかで書いてある。